In this super short video, we'll go through the multiple different ways that you can add file attachments from within Salesforce to your Salesforce flow emails. To be able to do this, you need to understand the underlying data model of Salesforce Files, which we go over really quickly in the next slide. And then we'll look at attaching a single file from a record, attaching multiple files from a Salesforce record, attaching a file from a Salesforce library, and then multiple files from a Salesforce library. In each case, there'll be a simple slide that sort of lists the different steps, and then we'll show you a specific flow that's sort of mapped to each one of those processes. For each scenario, we're just trying to find the sort of quickest and most efficient way to access the relevant attachment ID, which is what we need to be able to enter into the send email action within your Salesforce flow. So firstly, understanding the Salesforce Files data model. So the legacy Salesforce feature that enabled files and attachments was called Notes and Attachments, which sort of combined text notes and files, but this feature is being phased out. So Files, or Salesforce Files, is the new Salesforce feature that enables files and document uploads, and it's preferred for a couple of reasons, particularly its sort of file versioning capabilities. It's got better permissions and also allows larger files, and I think more file formats potentially. But there is a range of different objects that are used to sort of provide that files functionality, specifically the content document and the content version objects, which you need to be familiar with if you want to try and access files as attachments. So how it looks is there is a sort of a content document, and then it's like a parent object, which there's sort of a single content document record for each attachment that you upload. And then as you do different versions, there'll be a separate content version, which is like a child record of that content document. So just to try and tease out the differences a bit more, you can see off this table here. So a content document is like the container or the identifier of a file. There's no actual file data, it's just metadata about the file. There's only one of those per file, regardless of how many versions. It's created when the first version of the file is first uploaded, and it acts as the parent object to all the various content version records. Contrasting that is what's called the content version object. So it represents a very specific version of a document that you may have uploaded. So as you make a change and upload a new version of a document, there'll be a new content version record related to that. So it is an actual, the file is actually connected to the file you've uploaded. It's not just metadata. There's one per version, and you'll have a new one created every time you upload a new version of the file. So content document is the parent, content version is the child. So you can have as many content version records as you have content versions, so to speak. But the good news is, as much as you need to know about that object, you can still access the ID of the latest version of the content document object itself. So it's got a special field on there called LatestPublishedVersionId. So if you can find the content document object ID, then just find that file from that object. You don't have to, I guess, further query the content versions and search for the most recent one. So that is a good feature. To demonstrate how to attach a single file from a Salesforce record, I'm going to use a DevLog here, and I've got obviously a sample opportunity, and you can see a few different files attached here. And I want to show the process of how I would get the ID and the relevant field ID of this proposal one document and attach that to an email. So content documents are connected to Salesforce records using a junction object called the content document link. So that's one more object that you need to be aware of. So that junction object means that one record, like a Salesforce record, can have multiple different file attachments, and it means that a single file upload can be connected to multiple records. So without that junction object, a record could only have one attachment, or a file could only be connected to a single record. So it's an important junction object, and there's two fields that you need to specifically be aware of. So one is called linked entity ID. That's what references the Salesforce record, the contact account opportunity that the file is connected to. And then content document ID. So it refers to the content document ID and it refers to the Salesforce record in question. So in our case, it's that opportunity. So I'm going to get that opportunity ID because I'm going to need that. Now, in terms of a flow, so the process we need to follow is firstly, get the Salesforce record. So I've got that opportunity ID now. We want to find all the content document link records. That's the junction object. Find all the content document links that are related to that record. We're then going to use the transform element to create a content document collection. That's a bit more efficient than sort of doing a loop and assignment process. We'll use the transform element. And then we're going to filter those content document IDs to find that file I want, which was proposal number 1. From there, I'm going to get the ContentVersion ID, which is that specific field on the content document record, and then we'll add that to the Salesforce flow. So what that looks like on the flow canvas, I'm using an auto-launched flow here, but firstly, we're getting all those content document links where the linked entity ID is this record ID for that opportunity. From there, we're going to transform. So we've got a collection of content document links. We're going to use the transform element to extract the content document ID for each of those records. So that is going to give us a collection of content document IDs, content documents. From that collection of content documents, I'm going to filter it down and say the ID had to be included in that new collection we made, and it has to have a title of proposal 1 because that is the file that we want. And then from there, I'm going to reference this get collection or this get result from my email action. So in my attachment ID field, I'm referencing the get content document element, and I'm accessing the last published version ID, which is that field on the content document object, which gives me the content version ID of the most recent content version. So that is the sort of simplest way I'm aware of. So if we debug that, I'll give it the opportunity ID. That's all worked. So it's gone to get the records. It's transformed them. So it's found 3 different records there, which matches up. We've then narrowed it down to the one which meets that criteria. So firstly, it's in that collection and it's got the name proposal 1. It's found that ID, and then it's added that ID to the send email action. So that's how you'd find a very specific single content document record, and then find the version ID you need to be able to send it as a Salesforce email. Now, if I wanted to attach multiple files from that opportunity, so you can see I've got 3 there. And let's just say, for example, there's a whole stack of files there, but I just want to attach these 3 proposal documents. Then it's a very similar process, but with an additional step or 2 towards the end. So like we did before, we're going to firstly get our record, get all the junction object links, so the get content document links, find all those content document link records. We're going to transform that content document link collection and extract the content document ID for each one of those. So then we'll have a collection of content documents. We'll then filter those using the title just to make sure we just get the files we want, any of those files that include the word proposal in their title. So we'll narrow that down. And then we're going to create another collection because we want to get all the last published version IDs for each of those content documents. So we're going to use the transform element one more time to then take our content document collection and extract the last version IDs to create a new collection that just includes those version IDs that we need. From there, we need to make a small change to the formatting of that collection so that it's accepted by the email action, and then we'll add that. So I'll show you those steps. So it looks very much the same, except we've got an additional sort of transform step here. So firstly, we're getting all those junction object IDs. We're then going to transform that. So we're going to extract the content document ID into a new collection of content document IDs. From there, we'll get all the content documents from that collection where the title includes that word proposal. So then we've got a new collection of content documents. And then from that collection, we want to extract the last content version ID into an additional collection. So we use the transform element again. So from the content document object, we're taking the last published version ID because that saves us having to then query the content version object again. So we'll take that ID to create a new collection of content version IDs. And then the way that that is formatted has got the sort of square brackets either side, and that means the send email action won't accept it in that format. So I've got a formula field here that just simply extracts those two square brackets. So if you look at this formula, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. This is just one, but basically we're just extracting those two square brackets, just sort of, so we've got a single sort of comma delimited list, which is what it tells us it needs, which we've then added. So you can see by this it says it needs to be a comma delimited list, but the nature of the collection is that it includes those square brackets. So I'll just debug that to show you. If we add in that opportunity ID, so that's been successful. So firstly, we've got all the content document links. We found all those records. We've then transformed that and extracted the content document ID for each of those content document link records. So now we've got a collection of content documents. From there, we narrow down our collection. So we say we want them to be part of that initial collection we found, but only those that include the word proposal. So it's found 3. And then we've transformed that further. So we've taken that collection we made and we've extracted the content version ID from that specific field that sits there. So now we've got a new collection. And as we said, this is basically good to go, but we have to extract those two square brackets. If we just include this reference itself, that collection will not be suitable because it's got the square brackets. So we've used the formula and then we've added that formula, which comes straight in here, and that has been successful. So that's how you'd find multiple attachments of a Salesforce record and get them attached to an email. If you want to attach a file to a Salesforce Flow email and you know the name of it, and it's not about sort of being a related record, as long as you know the file name, you can actually query it very quickly and very easily. To do that, literally all you need to do is get the document ID by searching for it using the title and type of the file in the flow. Get that last published version ID value from that content document record and insert that straight into the send email action. So for example, here's my auto launch flow. I would then get the content documents. So if I want to find a file where the title equals cat1, if I'm looking at my files list here in attachments, there is a file called cat1. So if for some reason that's the file that I want to attach, I can just go title equals cat1, find that first record, and then in your send email action, just reference the content document last published version ID value, and that will give you the reference to that file to be able to successfully attach that. So yeah, if it's any file you've got just sitting in one of your attachment folders or one of your file folders, you can find it just by querying it based on the name. If you want to attach multiple files from your Salesforce Files area and you know the folder they're in, that's also quite simple you can do. So it's very similar to the process we just followed, just with one additional step. So the first thing you want to do is find out the content workspace ID. So if we look at our library list here, the sort of library folder name is technically referred to as a content workspace. That's the sort of API name for that object. So the object name is library, but the sort of API name is content workspace. So you want to query a content workspace to find a sort of a folder with the name animals, and then get all the files within that folder. So what that would look like is to get content workspace. So here's the object library, but you can see library object, sort of the name is library, but the actual sort of API reference is content workspace. So we're going to query that object for one that's got a name equals animals. That's what we just looked at. So we just want to find a single folder with that. Then we want to make a collection of all content documents where the parent ID is the ID of that content workspace. So if we find our get content workspace ID, So every content document has got a field called parent ID, which says what folder it sits in. So we want the parent ID. We want all the files where the parent ID is that sort of content workspace ID. So I just want to save that as a new version. And I'll just show you that very quickly. So if you look at a file here, for example, if I click on cat1, I'm not quite seeing the content document ID, but if I look at the file details, you can see I've now got the content document ID there. So I'm definitely looking at the content document record. Now, if I just inspect that, show all data, you can see that this record has got a parent ID. That parent ID is a content workspace object, and that is the ID there. So that's what we're querying. So we're saying, I want all files where the parent ID equals the ID of that folder that we identified. So we've got that collection there, so we're making a collection, and then obviously we've got the content document records, but we can't insert those IDs into the email action. It needs to be the version IDs, which we can access from that record. So we'll transform that collection. So from our list of content documents, we want to get the latest published version ID of each one and create a collection of version IDs. And then because the format of those includes the square brackets sort of around those list of IDs, we need to transform that with a formula. Again, I've got a very simple formula here that just extracts those sort of square brackets. There's multiple ways you could do that. And then in my email action, I can then insert that sort of modified comma delimited list. So if you know the file name and you just want to get one file, you can query that name directly. If there's multiple files within a folder you want, then you just got to figure out the ID of that folder, which is a content workspace, and then query all files that have a sort of parent ID that matches that folder ID. Create your collection, extract all the content version IDs off your content document IDs, and then modify that to make it suitable for the send email action. Hope that helps.